Or keep it.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this panel discussion on cardiac and today we will be discussing a case of ischemic cardiomyopathy, a patient with a left ventricular ejection fraction of 30% for laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Along with me, I've got an esteemed list of panelists. The panelists are Dr. Ramesh Patel, Dr. Vijesh Venugopal, Dr. Venugopal Kulkarni, and Dr. Vinita Panigrahi. I'll introduce each one of them. Dr. Vijesh Venugopal is a professor and head of anesthesiology at KMCT Medical College, Calicut in Kerala. He is basically a cardiac anesthesiologist who has also won the COPS Award in the pain category. He has got 12 publications nationally and internationally in peer-reviewed journals. The second panelist is Dr. Ramesh Patel. Dr. Ramesh Patel is the professor of cardiac anesthesiology at UN Mehta Institute of Cardiology and Research Center. He has got 22 publications. UN Mehta Institute of Cardiology, as you know, is a premier cardiology institute of Gujarat. The third panelist is Dr. Vinita Panigrahi. She is the senior consultant and head of emergency services at the Tata Main Hospital, Jamshedpur, a very prestigious institute. She has got a lot of teaching experience, basically in the field of critical care, and she's a DNB teacher for critical care. She's also been awarded with the VG Appakutti Gold Medal for DNB anesthesia. She's got 7 national and international publications. The last panelist is Dr. Venugopal Kulkarni. Dr. Venugopal Kulkarni is the head of the Department of Anesthesiology at the Citizens Specialty Hospital, Hyderabad. His keen interest in TE has landed him with a gold medal in 2016 for TE. He has got 12 publications and is basically a cardiac anesthesiologist. So we start off with the panel discussion and we discuss the case scenario. A 64-year-old male patient is scheduled for laparoscopic cholecystectomy. The patient is a diagnosed case of ischemic cardiomyopathy and has also got diabetes mellitus. An echo of the patient was done as a routine 15 days back, which had revealed a moderate mitral regurgitation with an LV ejection fraction of 30%, but no regional wall motion anomaly was there. The patient also gives history of having a coronary angiography done about 2 years back, which showed a non-significant diffuse coronary disease, but the lesions were not did not require any intervention because they were between 40 and 50% of the vessel diameter. On eliciting history, the patient gives history of being on statin therapy and on oral antidiabetics. The patient is not at present on any vasoactive medication. He presented with biliary colic about 2 days back, which was relieved by antispasmodics prescribed by a general practitioner. He has history of multiple such episodes in the last 2 weeks. Ultrasound done showed multiple small calculi in the gallbladder. His diabetic control is reasonably good, and over the last 2 years, though it used to be irregular earlier, but for the last 2 years, his diabetic control has been very good because he was told that you've got cardiomyopathy and you better control your diabetes. He has got history of peptic ulceration and has been on proton pump inhibitors for gastric reflux disease for the last few years. Patient has no other significant history. On clinical examination, his heart rate is 90, blood pressure 104/72, a respiratory rate of 16. His BMI is 30, but he's got a normal sinus rhythm. On examination, he also shows mild pedal edema. His chest is clear. Investigation reveals a slight bit of anemia, that is, his hemoglobin is 7.5. Blood sugar is 178. His SGOT is mildly raised to 124, SGPT 118, alkaline phosphatase to 76. His creatinine is 1.7, just as borderline kidney injury. HbA1c 6.9. His pro-BNP is about 500. ECG is within normal limits. X-ray is generally clear except for mild cardiomegaly. All other investigations are essentially normal. So now that I've described the case, I would like to ask our esteemed panelists certain questions, basically to explain to the delegates how we should manage this case. My first question is directed to Dr. Kulkarni. Dr. Kulkarni, I would like to ask you, would you like to accept this case with the available data, or would you like a more comprehensive evaluation, optimization of the case before you take up the case for surgery?
So I think some more optimization, some more details are required. For example, in this patient, echo, we only have half the details. We don't know about the diastolic function of the left ventricle. We don't know about the right heart. We don't know about the whether there is any increased pulmonary artery pressure. So these data are required. And there is elevated creatinine. We need to know about what is the renal function. And we need, because the hemoglobin is less, we need further optimization on that. And we also need to see whether we can do early versus delayed cholecystectomy in this patient. With the surgeon, I would have more details. And also like whether we can do an angiogram or a stress echo to see what is the reserve of the heart is one more thing that we can look into.
Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni. Dr. Binita wants to add something.
A few information in the form of his functional status. So what is his MET level? Yeah, whether he has had any history of orthopnea or paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. And does he have a hepatomegaly? Because his enzymes are slightly raised, showing a congestive hepatopathy. So whether the hepatomegaly is there or not. So I think these, and plus the BMI is on the borderline between overweight and obese. So does this patient have any symptoms of an obstructive sleep apnea? That information actually helps in planning out the intraoperative and also postoperative anesthesia. It will also help us in optimizing the patient better.
Okay. When I prepared this case scenario, I purposely kept it like this for a simple reason that the patient has got biliary colic, and the surgeon wants to say that he has to take the patient up immediately for surgery after an ERCP also. So in case that is so, there is no time more, no other time available. Now we have to take up this case for surgery. Dr. Binita, I would like to ask you, would you prefer to have a cardiac anesthetist or a cardiologist present in the OT when you are managing this case? And in case you want a cardiology or a cardiac anesthetist in the OT, for what reason would you like to have the person in the OT?
See, this patient already has cardiac risk factors. The age is there is ankle edema, and the LVEF is quite low. So we should expect rather an intraoperative myocardial ischemic episode, quite possible. So in this case, the presence of a cardiac anesthetist is very useful, not only to early detect, but also to for a better monitoring and management intraoperative. So this patient would be taken up under invasive monitoring, and preferably a esophageal echocardiography also would be needed. So in these cases, analysis of the ST segment, managing the ischemia and also the hypertension, sometimes it could be refractory. So the presence of a cardiac anesthetist would be very, very safe for this patient.
Okay. I would agree with you. Yes, agree. But in case the other three panelists are cardiac anesthetists, do they feel they agree with this, or would they want something else? Anybody, any one of you, please. Dr.
Yes, cardiac anesthetist and cardiologist presence will be very, very helpful, because such disaster may happen on possibility of VT, VF or asystole. We have to put a temporary pacemaker. So all the things, all the complications, keep in mind for safer side, presence of cardiologist as well as cardiac anesthetist is very much helpful for the patient.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. I would disagree with you on one point only, the cardiologist. I would never allow a cardiologist in my OT. A cardiac anesthetist is very competent, and I would never allow a cardiologist. I've never allowed till date in my life any cardiologist in my OT. Anyway, so we go ahead, and So my next question is directed to Dr. Vijesh. Dr. Vijesh, what is your recommendation about the level of the hospital which can deal with such a case? And what should be the level of monitoring which should be available? Supposing it has come to a nursing home, would you like to do it in a nursing home, or would you like to say that no, this has to be done at a particular level of the hospital?
I think it would be better to do this at a tertiary care level hospital, and prevention of cardiovascular complications may be accomplished through a sound understanding of the hemodynamic and physiological consequences of laparoscopic surgery, as well as a defined operative plan that can be generated by a multidisciplinary team involving the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, as well as the cardiologist. Coming to the level of monitoring, I think in addition to the minimum mandatory monitoring of ASA standard, we should also include the hemodynamic monitoring using the arterial line, and probably also have a close monitoring of the intra-abdominal pressure and the urine output, and also a few serial ABGs can be done, and glycemia monitoring is also important in this case.
Thank you, Dr. Vijesh. I agree with you, very much agree with you. It's very important that such cases be done only at a tertiary care hospital and not be taken up by chance in a small hospital. Because these patients can always, the balance can tilt in these patients at any stage, and they may require their nephrologist to manage the post-operative renal function, or may go into low cardiac output states, and they need a lot of hemodynamic support. So it's a very important thing that they should be managed in a setup which is tuned for this, and that is a tertiary care hospital. Thank you very much. So my next question is directed towards Dr. Ramesh Patel. Dr. Ramesh Patel, the current hemoglobin level of this case is quite reasonably low. I would say not very low, but it's reasonably low. Would you like to build up the hemoglobin before you take up this case for surgery?
Yes, sir. Before taking patient into OT, I would like to optimize the hemoglobin level up to 9 to 10%, because it will very much it will be helpful in managing intraoperative hypoxia, and that will reduce the chances of ventilation perfusion mismatch. Chances of myocardial ischemia will be less. So I would like to optimize the hemoglobin up to 9.5 to 10.
Very much agree with you. Actually, this is one of the transfusion triggers recommended by the ASA. ASA says that in a patient who has got a cardiac disease but also has got symptomatology which is related to this, it is very important to have a hemoglobin around 10 at least in such patients. So you very rightly said that. And secondly, as you again pointed out, it is very important that a good hemoglobin is there, because as it is, the cardiac output is compromised, and we need better oxygen carrying capacity in the patient. That's right. So my next question is directed towards Dr. Kulkarni. Dr. Kulkarni, what do you feel are the issues for laparoscopic surgery in patients with poor cardiac function? What are the issues which are likely to happen, and what are the things you do to overcome this problem? Dr. Kulkarni, your voice is not audible now. Your mic is off. No, Dr. Kulkarni, your mic is off. Please put it on.
Yeah, fine. I mean, with laparoscopy, as we are insufflating carbon dioxide into the abdomen, the intra-abdominal pressure goes up. That causes reduction in the preload and also increase in the afterload. That puts a lot of stress on the hemodynamics, which is already stressed. So that is one of the major issues. And adding carbon dioxide will add to respiratory acidosis. That will further worsen the hemodynamics. And also you have positional issues, like we give some reverse Trendelenburg position for better visualization of the gallbladder. So we have to be careful when we are doing these things. We have to limit the intra-abdominal pressures, and we have to ensure that the carbon dioxide is in the normal range. So these adjustments we need to make. These are our main concerns.
So, Dr. Kulkarni, what about the PVR, SVR, the importance of that?
Yes, SVR goes up because afterload goes up, and then PVR also goes up because the carbon dioxide goes up, and then we are ventilating at a higher rate. So this puts, I mean, already we have a myocardial regurgitation patient, and the myocardial regurgitation worsens because SVR goes up. So yeah, I mean, we can go into, I mean, hypotension. All these things can result in cardiac output can go down.
Yes. So that's very important. So what very important to always regulate your cardiac output. So you have to sort of manipulate both the PVR as well as the SVR. You have to keep the SVR low as well as the PVR low so as to make the heart function better. So it's very important that we have to ask the surgeon not to insufflate at a very high pressure. Keep the pressures to 12 or less. That's a very important thing in this thing, so that the CO2 also doesn't build up. In case CO2 is building up, you have to hyperventilate and accordingly reduce the CO2. And in case your pressures are going up, the SVR will go up. So it is very important to regulate that. Okay, my next question is directed to Dr. Benita. Dr. Benita, would you like to tell the surgeon to rather cancel the case or do it as an open surgery, and explain your viewpoint? Why do you want to do whatever is your recommendation? Just explain that.
Laparoscopic has its own advantages. It has because of less tissue handling and less of ileus. So there are certain better wound healing. So there are certain advantages of laparoscopic surgery. Now, there are many studies and meta-analysis have been done that have compared laparoscopy with an open surgery. And they have said that there is no significant difference in the outcome. So in this case, because the patient is already a compromised patient, we would like to decrease the tissue handling and the risk of bleeding and chances of wound healing, atelectasis as much as possible. So it is better to avoid a open surgery. Now, since this patient is not very compromised as is shown by the vitals given, he is about just borderline. So if the intraoperative hemodynamics are managed well, and if the surgeon cooperates and tries to keep the intra-abdominal pressure less than 15, then I think the laparoscopic surgery would be better for this patient.
Yes, I very much agree with you on that. The laparoscopic surgery is the only alternative actually. Open surgery is out, and unfortunately, why I asked you this question purposely is, it was purposely asked because there are lots of our colleagues who believe that laparoscopic surgery cannot be done in such patients, and we should rather do open surgery because it's safe as far as the hemodynamics are concerned. Actually, it may be safe as far as hemodynamics are concerned, but the effects of open surgery, the effects on the pulmonary function post-operatively are very severe, and it is best avoided, and it should better to do an interventional laparoscopic surgery. Very well said, ma'am. Thank you very much. So
and more so with a BMI of around 30. So we would do a minimally invasive surgery rather going for an open.
Okay, and my next question is directed towards Vijesh. Dr. Vijesh, can you recommend the sequence of induction, intubation in this case, and what kind of monitoring, invasive, non-invasive monitoring? When should you start the monitoring, and when should you do everything?
I would like to institute ECG, SpO2, all the minimum mandatory monitoring requirements in this patient. And I would like to take the patient up and under local anesthesia, put in and insert a 16 gauge peripheral venous line, radial arterial line, and a central venous pressure monitoring. And after the radial arterial line is put, I would like to get a baseline APG done, and would like to pre-oxygenate this patient for 3 minutes with 100% oxygen. And anesthesia, I would like to induce with etomidate. I would like to base my drugs on ideal body weight because patient is obese. So I would base my drug calculations on ideal body weight. I would like to give him midazolam 2 milligrams, fentanyl of around 2 microgram per kilogram. And I would like to use muscle relaxant rocuronium 1 milligram per kilogram, and would like to intubate him with an endotracheal tube because he's a long-standing diabetic with reflux disease. So an endotracheal tube would be the best conduit. I would like to insert the endotracheal tube, confirm it, and then secure it, and institute ETCO2 monitoring along with end-tidal anesthetic agent concentration. Also would like to monitor the peak airway pressures and would like to insert a Riles tube also in this patient because I would like to deflate the stomach, not only to improve the surgical view, but also to avoid gastric injury when the trocar is being inserted, and would insert a nasopharyngeal temperature probe and Foley's catheter to monitor the urine output. The patient would be ventilated using a 40-60 oxygen air mixture, and I would like to adjust his respiratory rate to maintain a ETCO2 of around 35 millimeter mercury, and would like to observe the flow volume loops also. At this time, I would also like to institute or I would like to put in a TE and do a baseline monitoring of his LV function as well as the filling of the LV.
Thank you. So my next question is directed towards Dr. Ramesh Patel. Dr. Ramesh Patel, how would you like to maintain anesthesia in such a case? What are the issues during maintenance? What are the likely events which can occur during maintenance, which you should be careful about?
Yes, sir. Patient is already induced with Dr. Vijay, sir. Now, I would like to maintain the anesthesia with inhalation anesthetics like sevoflurane, and with opioid and muscle relaxant intermittent, I will give bolus. And strict vigilance on hemodynamic parameter on multipara monitors. I would like to continuous watch on transesophageal echocardiography monitoring for left ventricular and diastolic diameter, as well as left ventricular stress wall measurement. And of course, I have to keep watch on cardiac output, and if possible, continuous cardiac output monitoring is very much helpful in intraoperative management of this patient.
So if in case you're planning to do a continuous cardiac output monitoring, what monitor would you prefer using?
2, 3 semi-invasive like direct flow track measurement, or continuous cardiac output monitoring with pulmonary artery catheter insertion. So it will help in measurement of pulmonary capillary wedge pressure also. So it will be also very much helpful in titration of if any requirement of inotropes or.
I would agree with you on PA catheter use, at least in this. Maybe though I would not do my personal view, of course it is not anybody has its own view. By personal views, I would not go in for so much of invasion, as because just 30% or so ejection fraction. Maybe if required, yes, I can do something like a flow track or something. Maybe that's the maximum I would go, but not definitely not a PA catheter. Even flow track, I won't go in for even a flow track actually, or a Vigilio. Okay. So,
sir, you will like to insert TE or not?
TE, yes, TE definitely. TE is a very useful tool, which is definitely a very much required. And the one thing which I will worry about is in case the CO2 goes up, this patient is likely to go in for VTs and VTECs. So that is something I will be worried about, and I'll be very careful about maintaining my carbon dioxide levels in such a manner that this patient does not go in for such a thing. Okay, my next question is directed towards Dr. Kulkarni. Dr. Kulkarni, in case this patient has got develops intraoperative hypotension, how would you like to manage it?
Sir, my first step would be to give fluids so that adequate preload is there, especially with the patient with mitral regurgitation. I know the ejection fraction is less, but usually these patients are in the managed by the cardiologist in the preoperative setting. They usually are hypovolemic. So I would give some fluids, see what is the response of the fluids, and titrate the fluids appropriately. The other thing is to reduce the intra-abdominal pressure, see if there is any bleeding happening, which is like with a good surgeon, and it's not very vascular usually. So if it may not be bleeding that much, if there is a bleeding, we have to give some more volume. So these are the things that I would do, and see what is the intrathoracic pressure, because intrathoracic pressure also further reduces the venous return and can cause hypotension. So next is whether like we need to, the next option is to use some inotropes if it doesn't counter with that. And the third would be to use vasopressors, but the vasopressor is double-edged because it can worsen the MR. So I will be very careful when you're using vasopressors, and probably as a last resort, IBP, because it reduces the SVR and increases the forward flow. Yeah, I would not go to that extent, but it's a last option.
Yes. Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Ramesh, again on you. What would you recommend as the protocol for reversal and emergence from anesthesia?
In such cases, we don't think of extubation on table. So I would like to shift the patient in high-end ICUs and will like to ventilate for 2-3 hours, and strict vigilance on hemodynamic parameters and periodic echocardiography as well as ABGs. So because after desufflation, CO2 will remain high in ABGs, so we have to keep watch on that. And a strict pain management is also required, because while extubation, tachycardia is not helpful. Tachycardia is very much harmful to this patient. So I would like to watch for what the patient for 3-4 hours in the ICU.
I would not, I mean, if you ask me personally, I would never ventilate such a patient. For a left chole in the ICU, I would try to, I'll do a very slow, gradual extubation, ensuring that there's a washout of all the anesthetic gases, and maybe keep the patient in a semi-deep level and extubate. Because though he's obese, I would like to him to maintain his airway, of course, but I will not go to an extreme measure of ventilating for lap chole at least. But I don't know, the other panelists, if they have other views, they can always express it. Anybody wants to express something different? Dr. Binita?
Yeah, I would also, I am also in favor of extubating the patient on table. So preferably in a lighter plane of anesthesia when the patient is a little awake and able to maintain his reflexes. The reason being, if the pain has been adequately taken care of and patient is not very sedated, this obese patient, we would like to take him out in a lighter plane. And because of his BMI and also the fact that it is a laparoscopic surgery in the upper abdomen, so CPAP support for a few hours in the postoperative recovery would be helpful for him. And of course, we'll have to do a ABG monitoring to see that there is no carbon dioxide, PCO2 is not rising.
So a very good method of extubating such patients is to extubate them in semi-sitting position rather than extubating them or lying down. It is very helpful in doing it. Okay, my next question, short answer, not two answers because the time is getting over. So Dr. Binita, what would you recommend for post-operative pain relief? Anything special?
Basically, I would avoid a sedation. So a paracetamol and a light opioid, maybe tramadol would be okay. Port infiltration is a very helpful method in lap choles. It brings down the pain, but it will not reduce the pain in the right shoulder. So preferably when the surgeon is taking the trocar out, if there is a little infiltration of lidocaine in the peritoneal cavity, that's a very good modality. I think that will be good enough.
Yeah.
Patient control. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree with you very much. Actually, we don't need much of analgesia in this, except for port infiltration and maybe intraperitoneal installation of a local anesthetic. But that's the best way. Why, again, I raise this question is a lot of people have a tendency thinking that the patient has cardiac problems. So we should have a very high level of analgesia. It's generally not required after cholecystectomy. Thank you. And so my last question is directed towards Dr. Vijesh. Dr. Vijesh, what would be your recommendation for post-operative care? That is the level of care, ICU, HDU, or ward?
In the early postoperative period, I would like to put this patient in the ICU, especially because he's having a cardiovascular disease and he's more prone to hemodynamic changes and instabilities. So in these patients, probably the first 3 hours are very crucial because they can develop congestive heart failure. And so it's very important that we monitor for symptoms of myocardial ischemia and heart failure in the immediate postoperative period. So we should always keep a watch for the development of myocardial injury after non-cardiac surgery, MINS, which is quite common. So I would like to do even troponin measurements for this patient immediate postoperative so that I can know whether there is any issue that has cropped up. Also, we would like to give him good pain relief, as well as we should take care of the postoperative nausea and vomiting, which is very common with laparoscopic surgeries. So these are the 3 things that I would like to do. And probably after 24 hours in the ICU, I would shift to the HDU and then later to the ward.
Thank you, Dr. Vijesh. I very much again agree with you. That's how it should be, because the post-operative period is as critical as the intraoperative period, or probably more critical, because the patient is not under the active watch of an anesthesiologist. So it is very important that post-operative period has to be done with a lot of care. They should be monitored continuously. They are very prone to arrhythmias, patients with such low ejection fraction, especially the ones who tend to accumulate carbon dioxide and develop hypercarbia who are obese. So that's very important to see. I will have to, because of constraints of time, I'll have to end this panel discussion now. But I would like to thank the eminent panelists for a wonderful discourse. I'm sure everybody would have benefited from this wonderful panel discussion. All of you were great. My compliments to all of you for giving the best advice to the delegates. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, IISACON, for giving us all an opportunity to talk to all of them. Thank you very much and good evening.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.